47 men, one contract, and Marcus walked away before anyone threw the first punch. Did you know that in most industries, every company is fighting for the exact same customers using the exact same arguments at the exact same price points, while the customers they've never even thought to look for are sitting somewhere else, waiting for something that doesn't exist yet? Everyone in that room had been fighting the same fight for 11 years. Same clients, same pricing, same slow bleed. Marcus had been bleeding too, until the morning he stopped looking at the men across the table and started looking out the window. Marcus Vell ran a mid-sized events production company in a city that had 14 others.
I just don't know what else I can do.
He knew every one of their owners by first name. He'd lost contracts to all of them. He'd won some back. It was a war fought in spreadsheets and client lunches and desperate discount calls at 11 p.m. His studio smelled like old coffee and dry erase markers. 3 whiteboards on the wall, all covered in competitor analysis. Red arrows pointing down, numbers circled in red. His lead designer, Priya, had stopped updating the 3rd whiteboard. She'd just left it blank. He hadn't asked why. Every Monday morning, he ran the same meeting. Who are we losing to? Why did we lose? What would it take to win them back? His team gave the same answers every week, because the questions were always the same. The same tired faces around the same scratched table, saying the same things with slightly less conviction than the week before. His margins had shrunk from 22% to 7 inches 4 years. He'd told his wife it was a tough cycle. He'd been telling her that for 3 years. She'd stopped asking follow-up questions somewhere around year 2. He had a folder on his desktop called Strategy 2024. He hadn't opened it in 6 weeks. He kept meaning to. He worked 14 hours a day. He skipped lunch most days, not from discipline, but because he forgot. He drove home in the dark and sat in his car in the driveway for 4 or 5 minutes before going inside, without knowing why. He was exhausted and precise and completely, methodically wrong. It started with a cancellation. An architecture firm, a client he'd had for 6 years, called to say they were cutting their annual gala, not moving to a competitor, cancelling entirely, budget pressure. The CFO had looked at what the event actually cost versus what it actually produced, and the numbers didn't survive the meeting. Marcus sent the polite email. He used the template he always used. He changed 3 words. Then he sat with the cancellation for 2 days. He called the architecture firm's managing partner not to pitch, just to ask one question. What would have made it worth keeping? She paused before she answered. Not an uncomfortable pause, a thinking one. The kind people do when someone has finally asked them the right thing. The answer was 40 minutes long. He took 6 pages of notes. He'd never taken notes on a client call before, just talking points, bullet points, rebuttals to objections he anticipated. This was different. He was writing down things he didn't understand yet. What the partner described wasn't an event. It wasn't catering and lighting and AV. It was something about how their best clients felt when they walked in. Something about being seen as part of a world they aspired to, not just a firm that built things. Something about the particular silence that happens in a room when people realize they are witnessing something that will not happen again. Something, and she used this word twice.
Transcendent. Transcendent, Marcus.
Marcus drove home. He didn't go back to the office. He told his assistant he had a meeting. He didn't. He sat in his kitchen until 2 a.m. with a blank notebook. Not a laptop, not a whiteboard. A blank notebook he'd bought 3 years ago and never opened because he'd never had a thought he couldn't put in a spreadsheet. He wrote one word at the top of the page: who is not in the room. Not which competitors are winning, not what pricing model would work, not which client he'd underserved, not what package, what tier, what margin, what discount, what closing technique. Who is not in the room. He thought about the architecture firm's best clients. He thought about what they actually wanted when they walked into a room full of people who mattered. He thought about the city's luxury hospitality scene, hotels, private members' clubs, gallery openings, and the gap between what those spaces felt like and what corporate events always felt like. That specific gap, the gap between a room that makes you feel like you've arrived somewhere and a room that makes you feel like you're attending something. He thought about the kind of person who had never once Googled corporate event packages, who had never compared vendors, who didn't have a procurement process for this kind of decision, because this kind of decision had never existed for them yet. He thought about Priya's blank whiteboard. At 1:40 a.m., he wrote a second line under the first. It said, "They are not our competition's clients either." He called her at 7 a.m. She picked up on the second ring. She said,
"I've been waiting for you to call about something other than..."
They stopped doing events. They started doing experiences that happened to contain an event. The distinction sounds small. It wasn't. It changed everything. The budget conversations, the proposal format, the kind of person they spoke to first, the metrics they used to measure success, the vendors they worked with, the question they asked at the start of every project. They stopped asking, "What do you need?" They started asking, "What do you want people to feel when they leave?" The first proposal was for a pharmaceutical company, not a gala, not a conference. A 3-night immersive environment, part gallery, part theater, part dinner, built around the emotional story of one drug's development, 11 years from molecule to approval. The scientists who'd spent 9 years on it were there. Their families were there. Patients who'd been in trials were there. There was no stage. There was no keynote. There was no branded backdrop with a logo repeating in a grid. There were rooms. Each room was a year. You moved through time. The pharmaceutical company's procurement team rejected the proposal in under 20 minutes. The CEO approved it personally 4 days later. She had called the managing partner of the architecture firm first. They had never met. She called anyway. The event cost 3 times what they'd spent with any previous vendor. It ran over 3 evenings. On the final night, 2 of the trial patients spoke not on a stage, in a room designed to feel like a living room, and a room full of executives and scientists went completely silent for 4 minutes. Not politely silent, actually silent. The kind that happens when people are afraid to move in case it breaks something. Not a single attendee compared it to another event. There was nothing to compare it to. 3 of them asked Priya directly, not Marcus, Priya, if she did private work. Priya filled the third whiteboard, not with competitor names, with a different kind of list entirely. Cities, industries, types of moments, questions no one had thought to ask yet. 8 months later, Marcus got a call from Daniel Foss, owner of Foss Events, the largest of the 14. The one who'd taken 3 of Marcus's biggest clients in 2019. The one Marcus had lost sleep over. The one whose name appeared more than once in red on the second whiteboard. Daniel wanted to know if Marcus was hiring. He wasn't calling to poach. He wasn't calling to negotiate. He was calling because his own company had started losing clients, not to Marcus, not to anyone specific, to cancellations, budget cuts. CFOs doing math at the end of quarters and finding nothing on the other side of the equation that justified the number. The industry was contracting, not because of Marcus, not because of anything Daniel had done wrong. The water was getting shallower for everyone who was still fishing in the same place. Marcus listened. He didn't offer anything. He let Daniel finish. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said,
"I'm not hiring, but I'll send you."
He didn't send a deck. He didn't send a case study or a methodology document or a positioning framework. He sent him 6 pages of handwritten notes from a phone call with an architecture firm, photographed on his kitchen table at 2 a.m. The notebook was still open to that page. He'd never turned it. The third whiteboard of the studio was never read again. Marcus had it repainted. Not white, a very pale gray, the color of something that used to be one thing and had become something else without making a noise about it. Priya had written one thing in the corner, small enough that only she would see it from her desk. The ocean doesn't care about your war.